This video was sponsored by Ground News. My friends, welcome to the headquarters. The situation in the Middle East is taking a dramatic turn, as Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is now threatening to turn Beirut into a second Gaza, as there are increasing tensions with the Lebanese group Hezbollah north of the country. Meanwhile, Israeli forces are about to complete the encirclement of Gaza. What a disastrous first round for the Palestinian resistance. Where is Hamas? Is it me or they're getting wrecked? Let's take a look at a map. That was the situation on October 26. And here's the situation now, 2 weeks later. Essentially, the Israelis achieved this because they preferred to play Bob the Builder rather than Rambo. Seems like it was the right decision to wait until heads cool off before launching the offensive. The Israel-Palestine conflict is one of the most controversial events covered in recent history. Information is being released faster than it can be verified, and dramatized headlines are creating a deeper divide in an already polarized world. And that's why I've been using this app and website by Ground News for my research. With Ground News, you can easily compare headlines from all around the world and see things mainstream media doesn't show. This story on Netanyahu saying Israel will take over Gaza recently caught my attention. Ground News shows that more than 200 articles were published on this in the last few days, and they even showed a breakdown of coverage according to political affiliation. I can quickly see how reliable these outlets are. Almost 60% of their sources are rated highly factual, telling me there is some sensationalized coverage. When I look closer at the headlines, I could see this more clearly. The Jewish press, for example, says Israel to maintain security responsibility for Gaza, while CNN says White House warns Israel against reoccupying Gaza. It's really interesting to see local and international sources next to each other like this. Ground News also has a very neat timeline of events on the recent escalations. You will find it very interesting to see how each side of the political spectrum frames these ongoing events, and how that can easily shape our understanding of a situation. Go to ground.news/HistoryLegends to stay fully informed. Subscribe through my link for as little as $1 a month, or get 40% off unlimited access this month only. Not only will you support my channel, but you will also support a small team looking to hold the media accountable. In the center, the IDF pushed 7 kilometers through this gap called Wadi Gaza, and they reached all the way up to the sea, when they had a massive barbecue. Ahi, where's the invite? During this operation, they recorded this footage. You can see Israeli infantrymen near this Ferris wheel, which was geolocated right here on the map. Must have been emotional, since this was a former Israeli settlement called Netzarim. Long story short, that's how battalions of the 7th and 401st Armored Brigades cut off the Gaza Strip in two. Now with all the HMS combatants under siege, but with this area under control, the Israelis will be able to drill and install seismic sensors to detect any tunnels linking Gaza to the rest of the Gaza Strip. This Israeli armored column was spotted on the Al-Rashid coastal highway, and here you can see its geolocation. Meanwhile, this Israeli tank you can see in this video was spotted near the Al-Shati camp. That's because the IDF Group Center also advanced another 4 kilometers along the coastal highway. Their goal is to link up ASAP with this other grouping approaching from the north, and that pushed 6.5 kilometers from the other side. On the same coastal highway, you can see an entire Israeli platoon as more and more armored vehicles pour into the city. It's probably one of such units that secure the HMS Parliamentary Building. Currently, the main objective of the IDF is to take the Shifa Hospital into a pincer, as this place is believed to be home of an HMS underground command center. At this point of the battle, the Israelis are trying to bypass the building, and heavy fighting can also be seen near the Al-Quds University. At this point, it's just a matter of time before Gaza falls. Not so fast. Although the IDF keeps reporting hundreds of enemy fighters KIA, I have not seen any videos from the Israeli side confirming these claims, and where we can say with confidence that HMS did in fact suffer heavy losses. For sure, they could be 10 feet under in shattered buildings and tunnels, but to prove my point, on November 5th, an Israeli soldier told Haaretz, "We barely see the terrorists, they're underground." Other Israeli soldiers were complaining that hidden mortars were targeting their command posts with extreme accuracy, and that they had to constantly switch positions. HMS also posted the first video evidence of the use of a professional ATGM, which will make further Israeli mechanized incursions much more costly. So at the moment, just like any guerrilla force, Palestinian fighters appear to be just giving up ground, while laying ambushes and retaining the bulk of their units intact. The IDF's push along the coastal highway showed the vulnerability of Israeli armored columns and the inexperience of their crews. HMS deployed small and mobile anti-tank teams which roamed around the exposed, defenseless tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. As you can see here, Israeli armored units advanced right into ambushes. And if it wasn't for that very successful push in the center, the Israeli offensive would have been considered a fiasco. Because in some places, like in the town of Beit Hanun, HMS units actually stood their ground. Israeli troops could not break through, and now they painfully have to clear the area in a grinding battle and engage in house-to-house fighting, which naturally leads to more casualties. As of now, during the ground operations, the IDF lost 37 soldiers KIA and another 250 have been wounded. These numbers seem legit because a 7-to-1 ratio is pretty standard in counter-insurgency operations. However, most of these losses were recorded in the north of the Gaza Strip, along the coastal highway and in front of Beit Hanun. And according to various battlefield reports, most IDF losses were caused by explosives, namely RPGs and mortars. And strangely, very few were caused by IEDs. As the Israel Defense Force pushes deeper into Gaza, HMS could plan nasty ambushes. Remember that many of their troops still possess IDF uniforms. They could even use all the Israeli military vehicles they captured and turn them into vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. These can be packed with explosives and then be hidden in some shops, storage areas, or garages. Then, as Israeli armored columns push through the dense and tight streets of Gaza proper, the Palestinians can then use their VBID to infiltrate an enemy convoy, or simply pass through some checkpoint and just have them detonated in the middle of a massive grouping of Israeli tanks. Like these 50 Israeli armored vehicles parked in this open space. And in the middle of this chaos, Palestinian assault groups could storm the Israeli positions. We can't deny that the IDF's flanking operations met with great success. And it's mainly due to Israel's Combat Engineering Corps and their very special doctrine called BBW, or Bomb, Bulldozer, and Wipeout. Please don't Google this. As part of the first B, now as you've probably seen in the media, the Israeli aviation launched a brutal air campaign against Gaza, using massive payloads like these US-made 1-ton Mark 84 bombs, which can then be turned into Jewish JDAMs for more precision strikes. Those are used to flatten entire buildings, whose high lookout points could have been very useful for the defenders. According to the Times of Israel, 3,300 strikes were carried out by fighter jets, 860 by combat helicopters, and more than 570 by unmanned aerial vehicles. Meanwhile, although less publicized, Israeli 155mm self-propelled howitzers also heavily hammered insurgent positions. In this footage from the 29th of October, you can see how this building alone is surrounded by roughly 100 artillery craters. I imagine a lot of this shelling is done at night, probably to avoid people from recording videos. The follow-up stage consists of preparing the ground for armored formations. Israel has a very unique MRLS known as Carpet. It's like a mortar that can launch up to 20 thermobaric warheads at a super high angle at a range of 150 meters. Its objective is simple: clear a path by detonating any landmines or IEDs. As you can see on screen, there are at least 5 massive craters as a result of this carpet engineering vehicle. Then comes the second B of the doctrine. B for bulldozer. For example, on the first night of the offensive, bulldozers preceded the entire armored columns in order to open a safe path. I know. This would have not worked in Ukraine. There is a very specific reason as to why the Israeli thrust in the center and the penetration along the coastline have been so effective. Both of them took place in flat, open terrain, and both areas were largely covered by sand. If we go back to this picture, it's bulldozers that created this entire trail by simply turning the ground upside down. In this video, you can see 4 engineering vehicles, of which 3 are heavily armored IDF Caterpillar D9 bulldozers. In the next frame, they are seen steamrolling the sectors side by side. They are used to clear the ground of any explosives and remove any leftover IEDs and landmines. All this machinery allows the Israeli second wave, composed of armored units and infantry, to push forward at a fast pace in order to quickly secure the recently captured positions. And this is how this massive column of 100 infantrymen is advancing towards the front. As you can see, this is done at night, most likely to avoid enemy snipers and mortar fire. More importantly, the bulldozers also open a clear flattened path for supply trucks and various logistics vehicles to go back and forth between the front and the rear. The IDF currently has about 170 units of these D9 Caterpillar bulldozers. And let me tell you, they're very, very hard to destroy. That's why the Israeli command simply sent them forward as part of tightly packed armored columns, with no infantry support. Well, to be honest, if they take fire, they simply return fire from their machine guns and cannons from the direction of attack. And more often than not, they simply flatten the entire neighborhood. Here you can see the view from inside a Merkava 4 tank. You can barely see anything with this tunnel vision, and certainly not any approaching infantry. This reminds me of this claustrophobic Israeli war movie called Lebanon. Anyway, this allows the Palestinians to shoot RPGs virtually at point blank at motionless targets. Tactical genius. Once again, without any infantry support, which means they're either part of some tank recon unit or combat engineering elements. That explains why 50% of Israeli casualties have been among armored units and combat engineers. And according to HMS videos, we can confirm 40 tanks or infantry fighting vehicles as destroyed or damaged since October 27th. Israel does this because, like we've seen in the previous videos, the IDF is a pretty casualty-phobic army. It's pretty cynical, but they prefer to sacrifice a couple armored units than having to engage in multiple firefights involving infantry that could lead to hundreds of irrecoverable losses. At this point of the campaign, I can say that the Israeli battle plan is pretty logical. Push through Wadi Gaza in the center to cut off the logistics of the enemy, while flattening the coastal areas, as this will be the main logistics axis to supply IDF forces fighting inside the city. Still, because of all the tunnels that could be hidden, the Palestinian fighters could lay ambushes on these supply convoys and cause massive damage and casualties on troops, let's be honest, that are not really combat ready. Now comes the wipeout part of the doctrine. As you can see here, when I tell you everything is flattened, I mean it. Literally, all the buildings on the shore were demolished and then flattened, with all the ruins removed by the bulldozers. And another benefit of these armored formations is that they render IEDs pretty much useless, which could have potentially caused many casualties in the ranks of the infantry. Just like the Roman legions, Israeli soldiers essentially created huge open spaces to avoid enemy infiltrations and make any such attempts very costly. There's another huge benefit of using bulldozers. As they pass through, They fill up any tunnel openings with sand. It's very cheap, quick, and effective. However, more often than not, ground forces will call the Yahalom Elite Combat Engineering Units. Their job is to search and destroy for remaining tunnels that could be hidden on each side of this very important logistics axis. They won't risk going into these tunnels, but they will find a way to either seal them off or demolish the entry points. In this case, they actually went inside this HMS underground position, home of an artillery unit that could fire up to 60 rockets at once. Now, this BBW doctrine was largely successful on the outskirts of Gaza, as long as IDF armored columns were advancing in open terrain or lightly urbanized sectors. This open space made it really hard for the Palestinians to react. Any offensive move of these attackers would have exposed them to surveillance drones or simply the overwhelming firepower of the enemy. At the same time, using their combat experience, it's also very possible that HMS expected the Israelis to heavily use their engineering capabilities in order to sideline the threats of IEDs and landmines. Perhaps this is why the Palestinians focused on making RPGs for the last 2 years. From the latest footage I've seen, HMS mobile units are composed of RPG fire teams composed of 3 to 8 men that use tunnels for hit-and-run attacks. In this video, you can clearly see the type of tunnels used for the last step of these ambushes. And sometimes they climb out of the smallest exits and then silently have to crawl through open terrain. Other units are more fortunate, like these 5 men, each holding RPGs equipped with these Al Yassin rockets, using the cover of these bushes and all the trees. When they're close enough to the armored vehicles, they all fire at the same time at a range of 50 to 100 meters, if not closer. I repeat, all these raids are only possible because Israeli armored columns are not supported by infantry. We even have this crazy video of this Palestinian fighter running out of cover towards 4 Merkava tanks and calmly putting down an RPG rocket before running back and firing another RPG round straight at it. Now let's take a look at the fighting in the town of Beit Hanun. This sector was controlled by the Golani Brigade, the 551st and 35th Paratrooper Brigades, as well as tank support of the 53rd Armored Battalion. It seems this axis was more difficult than expected, because this is the sector where the IDF has achieved the least progress. I think the objective was to segment Gaza through this highway and further separate the defenders and prevent them from mutually supporting each other, a bit like the Germans did during the Warsaw Uprising. It's noteworthy to mention that the Palestinians hold the Beit Lahia Heights, overlooking the town of Beit Hanun. This hill is said to be full of underground tunnels and passages. From where HMS can fire its many camouflaged mortars, but from where they can also rapidly deploy their anti-tank systems, have them fire and quickly redeploy. The main reason behind the IDF's slow progress in Beit Hanun is the dense urban layout of the town, which could foreshadow what Israeli troops will face in Gaza proper. The tight streets make it very hard for the IDF to make full use of their firepower. Palestinian fighters use tunnels and these little holes to move from one combat position to another without being detected by surveillance drones. One tactic they often resort to is simply firing their RPG rockets at buildings occupied by enemy infantrymen, after which they quickly withdraw and change positions. It will also be much more complicated for combat engineers to open paths and detect tunnels in this urban maze of tightly packed, multi-level buildings. Bulldozers won't be able to simply shove aside the ruins and the rubble, and this will mean that armored vehicles won't be able to support the infantry during their attack. In the end, the outcome of the Battle of Gaza will largely depend on what the Lebanese faction of HZB will do, and what the Arab world will decide about this humanitarian crisis, as hundreds of thousands of civilians are stuck in this war zone and encircled by the IDF. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.